There we are. I'm also going to record on my phone because my marketing people are like, would you please behave differently? I think I'm going to do 4K. I have no idea. All right. So
That's
welcome.
probably better.
Oh, it is January 9th, 2025. We are in a new year. Isn't this so great? So welcome to my masterclass, and this is all about boundaries. And the reason why I teach boundaries is that, as an entrepreneurial, hi Jill, welcome. As an entrepreneurial leadership coach, I just a sec. Sorry, technology. The two biggest things that my clients struggle with are their mindset and HR. It's relationships. So how do you do in a relationship evolution where the biggest stress parts are? I hear over and over and over again, I love what I do. It's my HR issues that are really a problem. So I love doing John Gottman's work because he says he's the relationship guru here at the University of Washington in Seattle. If you sign up for relationships, you're signing up for conflict. And one of the biggest things that causes conflicts is a misunderstanding around how do you manage boundaries? How do you manage your own boundaries? How do you communicate them? How do you respect and graciously accept another person's no? We do a lot of work. There's a 6-week boundary training coming up, and the reason why I'm doing a 6-week is because it's a robust body of work. There's a lot to think about when you're dealing with human relationships. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing in this call, which is very brief, is to just go over some of the ways that I think about relationships so that you have the anatomy of a relationship and why it's important to keep those 3 parts in mind. And also something that I came up with recently around something called the trauma triangle, which is where boundary violations and dysfunctions, lower self-worth, and people-pleasing create a cluster of behaviors that don't actually serve our projects, our relationships, our own physical health, the health of our businesses, all the different kinds of things so this is very generalized as far as all human beings need to figure out how to have clean and healthy boundaries, and it's not bequeathed. We are not trained on how to do this. In fact, the opposite has been modeled for us. The opposite has been modeled. And as I talk about in the class, every single one of us, as a young person, had our boundaries violated because of how we treat children. We tickle them when they don't want to be tickled. We take their pictures constantly when they don't want to be on social media. My granddaughter's calling us out on that all the time. She's like, you need to ask permission before you take my picture. She's had every single minute of her life almost documented by these machines. This is a boundary violation. For me, where there was some neglect and I was part of a huge family. If anybody paid attention to me and did all of that, I was like, oh, they notice me. They love me. It makes me so happy. My youngest sister, who's very, very sensitive, anytime that happened to her, it occurred to her as a complete boundary violation. And so because we're not trained to be sensitive to where someone might want to have contact or not have contact, nor are we trained on how to communicate where our boundaries are. And so one of the things that happens as we age and we're, in more and more and more complex groups and doing different things, we may not know how to communicate. We may not even know where our boundaries are. And frequently we don't know where they are until they've been violated, until a line's been crossed. So I have developed the 6-week course, and why I want to because it is such important work. When I started doing this work, I had 3 different people say, whatever it is you're doing, please don't stop. Spontaneously. I mean, really, it was like, okay. And guess what? I'm a trauma survivor. I was a chronic people pleaser. I was chronically had low self-worth. And when I realized when I was feeling bad about myself was because I was feeling bad about myself about being traumatized. And so I just want to get some of the thinking, some of the ideas across to you today so that you can be noodling on it in your relationships and in your life. And it's, like I said, it's epidemic, it's pandemic as far as uh, where we all have work to do here. So I wanted to share with you one of the documents that I teach from. And I'm going to, so this comes directly from the mind clearing training. And this is what I call the anatomy of a relationship. So these are the 3 things to keep in mind when you're thinking about how am I going to evolve my relationship. So affinity, which is natural liking, it's a natural way of understanding. There's an ease in communication. There's, I like it, it's like generalized liking. But there's also there's an alignment. I think of affinity and alignment very much in the same way, and a level of ease. And then we're building affinity in all of our relationships. Like, how do we go about doing that? There's, of course, communication is a huge piece of how we navigate being humans together. And there's all different ways of being in communication. And then the reality piece is a lot of times, and a lot of the partners and couples that I work with frequently have high affinity and actually pretty healthy communication, but they are out of reality with each other. There's something that is like, one person was like, well, I just want you to step up with the kids. Like, there's a blended family. And the other person is, I didn't even really want to have kids. And the reality is that you have kids. How are you going to navigate this? You're choosing to be in relationship with each other. There's children involved. How do you navigate that? So one of the things that I like to teach is that talking about the breakdowns like that, if there's a failure there, then part of it is, how do you build the communication affinity? One of the things I love about Gottman is he talks about in every single relationship, there's at least 2 things that do not work. There's at least 2 things that are just never going to jive with the 2 of you. It's so helpful to walk into a relationship. You know, Susan, when you were talking about, let's just cut to the chase here. It's like, what is the actual project? And part of the project is, how do you navigate places in your life, in your relationships, where there are going to be power differentials, as an example. You know, it's like there's the 5 big hot spots in primary relationships tend to be money, power, sexuality, spirituality, children. And then there's another one that I add in all the time. You have somebody who's an entrepreneur and you have somebody who's risk averse. So you've got somebody who's in a pension job and you've got somebody who's flying without a neck. Dudes, there is going to be conflict there. There's a disconnect. So there's this place of, how do you work through all of these different things? One of the things I love about the arc triangle is that literally the entire relationship evolves, even if you just spend time on one point. You know, so one of the things that happens is that if there's been lots of conflict, lots of breakdowns, boundary violations, different things that are happening, it tanks the affinity. This happens in families all the time where there's cutoff. The affinity's been broken, the trust has broken down. People in our culture have been really trained to think that going away is to have a boundary. The other thing that I teach all the time is, you can say, no, you can't treat me like that, but then don't go away. And that's the part that is difficult for most of us. It's like, we finally are setting a boundary, and then we just want to peace out. And where the actual evolution happens is like, no, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to stay. So what happens when there's that kind of a break, that people aren't talking to each other, or you know, that it's just been really difficult. How do you start building affinity? That's the point you start with. Gottman talks about that too. He said, don't start with communication. Don't start with reality. Oh, you know, and he talked about it. He said, for 10 years, I thought, get the communication down and this is going to go well. In the 7 principles that make marriage work, there are 3 chapters on how to increase your love maps with each other. There's like 60 different, I mean, there's so many different things you can do. That's building affinity, work on the affinity. And people push back on this. They're like, no, we want to get it. And I'm like, no, you guys, like, I want to hear what you learned this last month with each other that was good. So that's one of the biggest things about when we're dealing with relationship evolution, which is this is the scaffolding for that. Really important. So again, when you're raising the affinity, like I have a sibling that we had very difficult relationship. It wasn't either of our faults. It's the trauma that we grew into. And as adults, we just never really connected with each other. And it was a heartbreak for me. When I started working on affinity, it was at a funeral. It was at a family celebration. All the siblings were around a campfire. I brought up the conversation about love languages. And it was like, how do you guys love to give and receive love? How do you like to receive love? You know, and I listed them out and I found out from my brother that words of acknowledgement were the most important thing to him. So I've been figuring out over the last 4 or 5 years how to do that with him in a natural, unforced, spontaneous way when we're together. And I'm watching the affinity in our relationship climb and climb and climb. Our communication's better. There's greater kindness and there's less cutoff in that relationship. I'm 65 than we've had in 65 years. So I live and breathe and teach from, as you guys know, my own life experiences because I love to tell stories and it goes into our brains differently. And I have to warn people I'm in a relationship with. I am going to tell stories if you really don't like it. Sorry. No, I'll respect your boundary. Tell me no. Please tell me no. Yeah. Jill, I love all your hearts. Your reactions are great. So I wanted to just show you, actually, before we go into the trauma, I wanted to find out if there was any questions, comments, anything that's coming up for you. And I'm going to pause the recording so that you're not on, where is it? How do I do that? Jill, go ahead and share, except I don't know how to turn, there. I have no idea how to turn off the recording when I'm on this screen. So I'm going to stop the share for a sec.
I love this.
Okay. Thank you. So the trauma triangle, I'm into triangles right now. It's very stable. As I was talking about at the very beginning, all of our all of us have suffered from having our boundaries violated. Every single one of us. Some very egregiously and some not so much. And one of the things that does is it sets up some patterns. So one of the things that gets in the way of setting clean and healthy boundaries is that we don't feel like we deserve them. There's something that's like that we're going to hurt another person's feeling if we say no. That their needs are more important than ours. That's too selfish. There's one of the words that I'm starting to get really sick of is narcissism. It's like the diagnosis, it's the diagnostics du jour. It was bipolar for a long time. Now everybody's a narcissist. It's like I'm hearing different things. It's like if we say no, if we prioritize our own care, if we place ourselves first, we're being a narcissist. It is complete BS, you guys. It is such BS. But as a people pleaser, as a chronic, recovering people pleaser, what that means is that I had that pattern laid in because I needed to look at who was in power And how do I keep them from losing their shit? How do I read the room, get really intentional? This is not conscious, but how do I make sure that that person is happy so that I don't get in trouble? All right. That's where this comes from. It is a total survival mechanism. And there's so much judgment and feeling bad about ourselves when you start looking at how are we people pleasing? We don't say no. It's kind of saccharine. It's like too sweet. And you guys can feel it too. And you know when you're doing it, giving in order to get. You guys know what it feels like when somebody comes in and they're just like, my stepdad talks about it. He said, God save me from people that want to help me. Because it was just like, whoa, what are you doing here? So there's one of the reasons why I teach this is because having compassion, taking care of ourselves first, making sure that we get that we deserve, that we really understand and internalize that we deserve to have the best life possible. And if we are setting ourselves up in conditions that have us have the best life possible, we're going to serve better. Coming into leadership, the reason why I'm a leadership coach is because you all have influence over lots and lots of people that I'll never know. And if I help you get into really good shape, you're going to be able to help other people and other people and other people. This is my calling. It's like I need to help everyone, and everybody's in leadership in a different way. Some people are in leaderships of large organizations. Some are leadership just in their family, but leading in your life is part of what I'm talking about here. When you're in the best shape possible. This includes having clean and healthy boundaries. And also knowing, how do you make requests? How do you identify the needs? So one of the things in nonviolent communication is underneath every single complaint is a need that's not getting met. All right. So people pleasing is a way to try to get our needs met. It's very indirect. It's not very satisfying. And it's actually not meeting our needs. It's just an attempt to do that. And so when I'm looking at boundary violations and boundary dysfunctions, one of the things I want to talk about with that is that we can get too loose and too rigid. And healthy boundaries are actually flexible. We're going to let in what we want to let in. We're going to say no to what we need to say no. It's also a way of, how do we relate to other people's boundaries? Like, part of why we don't want to say no is because we know what it feels like when somebody says no to us. There's also very deep gender conditioning here, and it's not, and just with every generalization, there's always exceptions to the rule, but females in particular have been trained to anticipate, accommodate, and serve other people's needs. That's like our prime function. And for us to say no looks like it's going to threaten the relationship. Men, on the other hand, have been trained to ask. You get a no, ask someone else, get a no, ask someone else, get a no, ask someone else, get a, until somebody fucking says yes. It's not relational, it's task oriented. And females are so relational. It's like, oh, if I hear it, it's gonna tank the relationship. Part of what's hard is people will get disappointed. People's feelings are going to be in the room. Our feelings are going to be in the room if somebody says no. And so part of what I focus on also is, how do you deal with the reactivity of emotions? So you're soothing those down, and you can actually be in the room with somebody who's having an upset because you said no. It's like, I got it. Be in the room with yourself. If somebody says no to you, it's like, got it. I'm going to respect your boundary. My granddaughter is just learning boundaries right and left, man. It is like, she is awesome. Can I hug you? No. Can I hug you now? Nope. Can I touch your foot? No. It's just like, "You wanna go for a walk?" No. Total no. It's like, this is adolescence too. Adolescents and toddlers have a lot in common. Oh, she's awesome, you know? She's awesome. I have to manage my feelings around she doesn't wanna have any physical contact right now. We used to snuggle, we used to sleep together. We slept together for 11 years. She's 12 now. Mm. Ain't gonna happen. So it's like we're all gonna have to navigate that. Um, the other thing here, and I'm sure you've read it, but it's like one of the things that's really horrible when there's trauma and there isn't emotional intelligence in the room and the people around haven't been able to get in there with us and help us process whatever upset happened because there was a violation or we weren't able to get it across. You know, a lot of my violations happened when I was pre-verbal. So there was no opportunity for me to communicate other than by crying that something was wrong. I'm still kind of scapegoated and mocked in my family for that. Oh, you were always on an emotional roller coaster. I was literally being bullied from the moment I was born. That's my emotional roller coaster. But one of the things that happens is when there's nobody receiving, there's nobody there to help us understand, to help us get through the emotional uh, squalls and storms that go through with company, then what our brains do is we automatically blame ourselves. All the data is there. There's so much research with trauma survivors around. We get hurt, we're not able to discharge and get company. It immediately boomerangs into there's something wrong with us. There's something that I did that caused that. I'm to blame. There's something wrong with me. It's universal how our brains are set up. And then we start feeling badly about ourselves, and that sets up this whole triangle. So the first place that I start is self-love. I give all of my leaders, put it on a Post-it, write it down and do it. Loving me first, and today this means fill in the blank. That does many, many, many different things. It interrupts the pattern of selfishness, thinking you're being selfish. It turns your brain out of how can I take care of other people into I need to be taking care of myself. The more responsible we are for ourselves, the more we're able to show up in service to everybody that we're called to be in service to. We show up in better shape. We have more slack. We have more resiliency. We're more able to gracefully hear somebody's no. If I'm getting most of my needs met and I'm asking you for something and you're not able to give it to me, it's like, okay, I'll figure that out someplace else. Mhm. People in sales have figured this out a lot more. Sales was pretty funny for me when I was first learning. It was like, it was my first $5,000 pitch and I was like freaking out. And I called one of my friends who's like sales and she said, well, let's just walk it through. What'll happen if they say no? And the very first thought was, I'm going to die. I mean, literally, that's what it felt like. And she was cracking up. She was like, oh, dude, we got to work on that. There's like this whole thing. The more we're loving ourselves, the more resilient we are, the more better shape, more rested, fed. What kind of state are we in when we're out here in the world? The less we'll be pulled into people pleasing. The easier it is for us to set a clean and healthy boundary. And the easier it is for us to receive clean and healthy boundaries from other people. So I'm going to stop the share and pause the recording.